Welcome to CONEXEC. Right here in Kentucky, it's a global leadership platform for construction executives. Today, I have Josh Marrillia with me, and rather than me talk about Josh, I'd rather have Josh kind of tell us about himself and his company and kind of the history. So, Josh, kind of tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up? How'd you get into the business you're in now?
Well, first, thank you for having me on the podcast today. I have listened to most every episode of the podcast, and I'm a big fan of the podcast and the folks that you have on the podcast on a regular basis. And as an executive within my company, the information that's shared on this podcast has been very helpful to me personally. So I want to first and foremost thank you for what you've been doing.
Well, that's good to hear. Good to hear for sure.
Yeah. So a little bit about me and a little bit about the company. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. I grew up in a family-owned
Can you say that
business.
living in Lexington?
I can. Now, I did go to school at UK, and I graduated from UK, and at this juncture in my life, I've lived in Lexington longer than Louisville, so it's more my home now. But no, I get that question all the time. So I grew up in Louisville in a family-owned excavating company, and I was the first of the fourth generation to work in that company. So that company's roots span all the way back to 1935.
Oh, wow.
And so, a long history of the Marrillia family in construction in the Louisville area. And so I grew up around construction. My father worked in the business. My grandparents owned the business. All of my uncles worked in the business. So from a early age, construction was all around me. And I tell people that, I got into construction because quite honestly, I didn't know how to do anything else. It was all that I had ever known. So I came to Lexington in the late 90s, attended the University of Kentucky.
So why'd you
got a civil?
Not to make anybody mad from Louisville, but why did you choose UK if you're from Louisville?
Well, to be honest with you, I had reached the point in my life where I felt like I needed to put a small amount of distance between me and my family. I love my family dearly. Maybe the old separation makes the heart grow fonder kind of thing, but my family is such a tight-knit group, and I felt like it was going to be good for me to get out from underneath of that umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, the decision to move to Lexington and attend the University of Kentucky, I think kind of proved that thought process, because had I stayed in Louisville and had I gone to, say, the University of Louisville and the speed school, could have very well been working for that family company today instead of owning my own business.
The funny thing is that my daughter did the opposite thing. We're here in Lexington, and she goes to the speed school in Louisville. So, so I almost took offense to it, but then I realized sometimes it's good to get away from home.
And it was for me. It certainly was for me. So, while I was going to the school or, going to the University of Kentucky, I was able to do some internships with an internship with a design build contractor here in Lexington. And that was the first time that I really had experience with construction outside of site work. I got exposed to the entire delivery method, all the way from inception to completion. And at that point, I knew that was my path. I liked the general contracting side of the business. I liked the diversity and the variety of experiences that gave me, as opposed to just a singular trade. So as I was nearing graduation, I made the decision that, I was not going to go back to Louisville to work in the family business. I was going to stay in Lexington. And the company that I was doing the internship with offered me a full-time position that I, eagerly accepted. And so that's kind of what launched my career. I worked for that company for a period of time, mainly doing design build projects for Japanese automotive suppliers. So a lot of industrial, manufacturing, distribution center type work. And then in around the 2005 timeframe, I was approached by a group in Lexington, a group that was doing development work, and they wanted to start their own in-house commercial general contracting division. So I was not out looking for other employment at the time, but it kind of made me an offer that I couldn't refuse, and spent 3 years working with that group. Unfortunately, that opportunity did not pan out to be what it was advertised to be and what I expected it to be. So as that portion of my career was coming to an end, I made the decision to start Marrillia Design and Construction and go into business for myself. So that was in 2008. We're entering our 12th year of operations. And when I started the company in 2008, it was actually early 2008. So here I am starting a construction company on, the eve of what turned out to be the Great Recession. And it, starting a company from nothing during that period of time was a set of challenges, in and of itself. And there was a lack of private negotiated work that was available for us to pursue at that point in time. So the market that we pursued was the public bid, publicly funded projects, and we were very successful in that market, and were able to secure enough projects and continue to secure projects over a period of time, and really built an entire business and an entire business model around pursuing and executing publicly funded projects. And that really kind of brings us to today.
And as far as, it's funny how there's like a inverse relationship between, when the economy, commercial goes down, then, federal spending goes up. A lot of people say, well, you're in construction, that's extremely volatile. Well, it's not if you're adaptable, and it sounds like, because I know what you do now, you don't just do public, you do a lot of different things, and you're extremely adaptable to different sectors. Am I correct in saying that?
That is correct. We're a pretty diverse company. We're not just a paper contractor. We do self-perform a lot of work. But the different market segments that we service, the majority of those markets are still under the umbrella of publicly funded projects. So we do a lot of education work, both in the K through 12 and higher education space. We do a lot of healthcare work, and some of that healthcare work, matter of fact, the majority of that healthcare work is still under the umbrella of publicly funded. We work for government municipalities. We do streetscape type projects. We work for local municipalities. So there's a lot. Yeah, we're diverse in the fact that we service a lot of different types of projects, but it's still within that public bid market. The private clients that we do have are very large companies for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason that we've had success with those companies is because they're so large, they function similar to a public entity. You know, some of our private customers are folks like LG&E KU and Kentucky American Water, you know, massive employers of people in their own right.
So, you know, and what I love about doing the public work, to be honest with you, is the discipline that kind of comes with it. You know, like I tell people all the time, submittal discipline. You know, that's something that in many different sectors is not there, you know, but is required to be there. And when you're working with public money, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, you're right. If you're going to be a company that's going to do public bid work and do it well, the contract administration portion of your company has to be a fine-tuned machine.
Mm-hmm.
Because that contract administration aspect is so important in all of the processes and procedures that come along with doing public work. And you know, to be honest with you, sometimes that works against us when we try to go do private work. You know, a private client might look at some of our procedures and protocols and methods and lines of communication and reporting as just overkill. And maybe that makes us not move as fast as we should. But certainly in the public realm, you have to really know how to develop a submittal log, you know, stay vigilant with submitting RFIs. Your daily reports have to contain wealths of information. And I could just go on and on and on about the contract administration side of public work, but I won't.
Well, and you know, the you know, from a commercial or looking at different sectors, it's not like what they're doing is, I mean, truly what you know, public funds does with their money. Project admin side is extremely valuable, regardless of what sector. It may not seem as valuable, but in fact it could be, and it probably should be, you know. And it just is, you know, we follow different set of rules sometimes, and it forces your hand to do things, you know. It's like, well, I can get away without having an approved submittal before you start construction, but that means that I could potentially put the wrong material in place, you know? So,
That's right.
Anyhow, so kind of moving on a little bit, I appreciate you telling me a little bit about the history. Can you tell me any like significant events that you had that kind of shaped the business model that you have today?
Well, I mentioned that before I started Marrillia Design and Construction in 2008, I had spent 3 years starting an in-house commercial general contracting division for a private development company. And that relationship came to an end because our only customer was that private developer.
Mm-hmm.
And that private developer ceased to be a going concern. They weren't financially viable. So when your only customer goes out of business, you're not left with a lot of options. And at the same time, that private developer owned the majority of that commercial construction division, and therefore made a lot of the financial decisions related to that division. And, you know, good, bad, or otherwise, I had a front row seat to that.
Mm-hmm.
And really learned what not to do. And as I started Marrillia Design and Construction, and as I've continued to operate and grow the company, I go back to those experiences that I had 12 plus years ago countless times as a way to measure what we're doing now to make sure that I'm not repeating some of the same mistakes that I experienced in years past.
And it's
so
funny how those failures actually are preparation for future.
Oh, absolutely. And I would tell anybody out there that that to truly be successful, you really got to experience some epic failures first, because if you learn so much more from the failures than you do from the successes.
Isn't that the truth?
Yes.
So tell me, what do you believe? Let me back up a second. How are you preparing for the future for your company? Obviously, the future is unknown. It's always unknown, but we can project. Some people say there's going to be an economic downturn. Some people say that's not going to happen for some time. How are you and your company preparing for the future?
Well, as far as the economic forecast, nobody has that crystal ball. We feel like for the rest of 2020, we don't think we're going to see a lot of growth, a lot of positive growth in our market. But at the same token, we don't think there's going to be any type of negative growth or a recession. So, and also for us, the public bid market doesn't experience the high highs and the low lows that the market as a whole might experience. So for us, we always know there's going to be opportunities. And what we're really trying to do to grow our business is the public market the public market in central Kentucky, or in Kentucky as a whole, I should say, over the past, say, 5 years, there's been a shift to allow public owners the flexibility to use different procurement methods and different project delivery methods than the traditional design, bid, build, low bid GC market. And we see our future growth as a company as being very dependent on being able to secure additional revenue via those alternate procurement and construction delivery methods, and primarily design build and more predominantly construction management work, CM at risk. And so we really, as a company, to grow, we want to grow in a way where we add resources and add personnel that give us strength in the areas of the alternative delivery methods.
So many companies, including my own, when you first grow, you don't have a 1-year plan, you have a next month plan, and then you have a 1-year plan, and then you have a 5-year plan. And then eventually you get to a point where you're thinking long term. You're thinking, okay, in 10 years or when I exit the business, this is what I plan to do. And like for me personally, my 10-year plan is to transition my company from me being the only owner to an employee-owned company, if the employees are willing to invest. But that's kind of my plan. Have you kind of, how have you gone? Obviously, you probably didn't have a 5-year plan to begin with, but do you have a 5-year plan in place now? And kind of like process.
Surprisingly, we do not have a formal written strategic 5-year plan. And that's something that we are going to develop this year. Specifically this fall is when that process is scheduled to start. I think as far as planning goes, myself and the executive leadership team here at Marrillia, we do a good job of communicating what our goals are over the course of the year and years, and we do a pretty good job about keeping each other updated on those goals and holding each other accountable to those goals. So while the plan is not as rigid as a defined document, future planning is something that we do take part in. It's maybe a little more fluid though than something that's more defined,
Well,
like a written 5-year plan.
and it's not, and I think it's all in the phase that you're in. I mean, everybody, not, a large company is going to have plans that are decades long, just because that's just what they deal with, and a smaller company may not. So, I mean, and I always think that's interesting. I read a book once about General Electric and about how they have generational plans, and I think that's pretty. But when an organization like General Electric, I mean, you're a multi-billion organization, you kind of have to have that in place. How are you going to deal with the future? But um, as far as your personal skills and ability, I mean, you created the business, from nothing. So, what do you think personally were your skills and ability that help you create that business?
Well, I think my own personal background in construction, as well as my engineering degree, were both two things that I really drew heavily upon when I started the business, and really to this day. I'm a very detail-oriented, numbers-driven person,
Mm-hmm.
almost to a fault. Um, we pride ourselves on being a company that makes data-driven decisions, not just gut decisions. And I think that type of disciplined, data-driven decision making has helped us grow and avoid risk. I also, within the company, the roles that I personally fill on a week-to-week and month-to-month basis is in the estimating pre-construction side of the business, and in the accounting side of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we cut our teeth, and we depend, and our survival depends on the low bid public market. And we do a really good job in developing very thorough, complete, cost efficient, cost competitive estimates. And I think that's the key strength that I bring to the team is leading that effort to bring work in the door. And we've had success there. So, whatever I'm doing there is working.
Well, I mean, the number one way companies fail is bad bids. So in our business, so the fact that you've been in business so long and in the public sector where low bid is what wins the day, I mean, that says something significant about your business. So, kind of going to your skills and ability, did you ever have, I mean, I know when I started my company, there's a certain amount of fear that associated with stepping out of the security that you have, maybe working for somebody. Did you have any of that, or was that just built into you because your family was entrepreneurs, and and that's what you kind of lived that life? I mean, describe that for me.
Well, I think growing up in that family-owned business environment helped. At the same token, Scott, when I first kind of went into business for myself, I was in my mid-20s, and that's pretty young. That's a pretty young age to start a business. And I tell people I wasn't as afraid of failure, because if I failed, I didn't have anything to really lose to begin with.
Yeah.
I didn't. I mean, it just, so I oftentimes think back. You know, I'm in my 40s now, and would I still be able to take the same leap today that I took in my 20s? With, you know, because I'm at a point in my life now where I don't want to start over.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, but there again, at the time, if I started over because the company didn't succeed, it was no big deal. Like I said, it didn't have anything at that time to begin with.
And that's that's a hard thing. And, you know, I tell people there's one word that is if you can deal with, and that's if you can deal without, it's comfort, you know. And you know, every day it's a comfort issue, you know. Am I willing to risk this to lose my comfortability, you know? Because I'm in the same position you are. Do I want to invest in my business and invest more to grow larger, or do I want to be where I'm at, you know? And so that's always that definitely is a tough one. It's easy to lose everything when we don't have anything. So,
well, but back to your point, sometimes larger isn't better.
yes.
You know, sometimes doing something well at the same level repeatedly, year after year after year after year, you can get to the end of a long period of time and look back and say, wow, we've had enormous success. And it's because we didn't try to force ourselves out of our lane of comfort. But it, you know, I think if I was giving advice to those listening, you always have to get yourself out of your comfort zone from time to time. As a business owner or as a business executive, you have to be willing to take risks. And I think the level of risk that individuals are willing to take is just that. It's an individual decision.
Mm-hmm.
We're pretty risk averse here. We like to stay away from risk as much as we can.
You know, as far as you know, when you talk about different parts of your business, what would you say were the key parts of your business that are your strength?
Well, certainly our estimating pre-construction portion of the business. I think we are known as a fierce competitor in our market. We secure our fair share of work, and that's a direct result of our strengths in the estimating and pre-construction side of things.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned a little bit about contract administration before, and I won't dive back in that rabbit hole again. But certainly having a lot of defined procedures and workflows around contract administration is a strength of ours when doing publicly funded projects. I mentioned that we self-perform work. So Marrillia Design and Construction has a self-performed site work division. So we've got excavators and track loaders and mini excavators and dump trucks and you know, all the necessary yellow iron that it takes to perform in that division. And we also have an absolutely incredible craft workforce where we self-perform our own general trades. And Scott, we also do general trades packages for larger construction managers. And so one of our strengths, and one of the reasons we can service a lot of different markets, is because we've got the ability to self-perform work.
Mm-hmm.
And self-performing work is also a tremendous profit center for Marrillia. And so that craft workforce that we have is certainly one of our strengths. Our executive leadership team here at Marrillia, you know, keeping in mind that the company is only 12 years old, the executive leadership team that's here has been together for about 7 years of our company's 12-year existence. So our executive leadership team is a pretty tight-knit group. We can be candid and open and honest with each other. We can have spirited disagreements, and it doesn't, negatively affect our personal relationships with each other. And I think that's really, really important to the health of a company, is to be able to disagree from time to time. We don't believe in consensus. We like to have majority, but don't necessarily have to have consensus to make every decision. And I think the last thing is the average experience of our workforce. The project managers and the site managers that really tend to excel here at Marrillia are folks that have decades of experience. And I think that's because in order to be successful here, you've got to be able to also kind of manage that craft workforce when they're on your project. And that oftentimes requires a certain skill set that can't be taught in the classroom, can't be taught in the textbook. It just takes years of experience to know the right means and methods, the right crew size, the right technique that you need to undertake for that crew to be successful on a regular basis. So workforce experience here is a big strength for us.
Well, you kind of took my question from me that I was going to ask you next, but I asked why self-perform, because I know that's not. I know, we used to have that model, and then we went away from that model, went down to being a paper GC, and then it seems like we're getting more and more people to go back to that model. And I think you explained it pretty well. I mean, that gives you a lot of opportunity. Now it's probably a struggle for you having those craft workers on board, just because all the challenges to keep them busy and everything that goes along with that, So, but.
Well, yeah, most of our site managers would tell me that we don't have enough craft workforce on a regular basis, because those guys are constantly being pulled in 1,000 different directions. But I tell you, having your own craft workforce in a market like what we're in right now, where there is just a scarcity of skilled labor across every trade, having the ability to have that craft workforce under your own roof so that you can execute that work when it's needed, as opposed to waiting on a subcontractor who might be understaffed or behind schedule on a different project and they can't get to you immediately. I think it solves more problems for us than creates problems. Having the ability to do that work ourselves.
So what, if you had to give advice to somebody who was looking to get into the construction business, own their own construction business and grow it, since you've done it, and you've done it during a period of time where it wasn't easy, we're like in that factor. I started my company up in 2007, so we both started it probably in one of the more challenging times. What advice would you give to a person?
Well, so this is actually my favorite portion of your podcast. And so I've given a lot of thought to this question. And my first item is something that's been repeated by some of the previous folks that you've interviewed, but I think having a supportive family, and especially a supportive, understanding spouse, is paramount to being a good executive. For me personally, owning a business and serving as the leader of the business, it requires an enormous amount of time, and it's very mentally taxing. Um, I've not been able to figure out how to leave my issues or my thoughts at the door, go home, and then pick those thoughts back up in the morning. They come home with me. And I spend a lot of time discussing things with my wife, and I'm very fortunate that, my wife is 10 times smarter than I am, and she's a lot more compassionate than I am. And she serves on the executive leadership team of her company. And her company is 1,000 times bigger than my company, and is actually a global leader in one of its divisions. So having her to help me make decisions, or to be a sounding board, or to give advice to me, it's invaluable. So first part of advice is supportive family. The second little bit of advice, and anybody who's currently in their career that is not in an executive level position within their company but wants to be, you have to learn to transition yourself from being a tactical person to being able to think in a more strategic fashion. And what I mean by that is, most individuals early in their career, they're going to rise up to the top of their company because they've been very, very good at executing a particular responsibility or role on a repeated basis. So they've been tactical. They've been good at executing. They're a great doer. When you're asked to move into the executive leadership level, you have to be able to think globally about your company. You have to be able to think strategically about your department. And that's really the exact opposite of that type of thinking is probably the exact opposite of why you got considered for that position in the first place. So that would be another bit of advice. The next two are kind of hand in hand, but I'm a big believer in servant leadership. Celebrate success as a team. Give credit to the team. Don't take personal credit for project successes. Scott, there's a lot of times where much of what I do in this company and the urgency with which I work is making sure that my fellow team members here have what they need the next day to be successful on their project. So if that means I'm, in front of the computer until midnight working on a change order so that person can submit that change order the following day, so be it. And this next bit of advice is something that has been touched on in several of your podcasts, but your soft skills. And this seems to come up time and time again. Your technical skills are really important, especially in the early part of your career. But being able to develop those soft skills, I feel like that's what really guarantees the success of people in executive level positions, because at that level, it's 90% about people, and it's about the people that are doing the work and making sure those people are supported, and making sure that you create a culture in which those people feel trusting of their counterparts. And then the last bit of advice that I would give for anybody wanting to pursue an executive level position in their company is you have to be able to teach and mentor to other people. And part of that is you have to be able to recognize your strengths, but also your weaknesses, and articulate your weaknesses. And you know, we talked before about learning from your failures. I think being able to articulate a personal weakness that you have to a coworker, and helping that person learn from your weaknesses is kind of an extension of learning from your failures. And it also humanizes you a little bit when you can look at people around you and say, you know, look, guys, I really need your help on this particular issue or topic because this is not my strong suit. I am not good at X, Y, or Z. And, you know, Mr. Smith, you are the best person that I know at this particular subject. I really need your help in getting through this. That Mr. Smith's going to respond to you in a much more positive fashion than because you've kind of, you know, admitted that that's your weakness.
Absolutely. You know, the funny thing about what you say is what, you know, you get promoted because of different skills than you than you use when you're in a leadership position, you know. And it's kind of funny. I talk about all the time. I have some younger people that say, you know, the ability to communicate with people is not as important as it is to learn scheduling. And I love scheduling. That's what I do for a living. That was the bread and butter of my company when I first started. But the truth of the matter is that you get a point where those persuasive communication skills are far more important than those technical skills. But you get promoted based on those technical skills.
And honestly, you might be the best example of the importance of soft skills because, you know, you led, how many years did you lead the construction management department at EKU?
At 10 years. Well,
okay,
so 5 of those 10, I was the leader of it.
Well, but a considerable period of time. And, you know, I mean, I can only imagine the technical knowledge that you have in your possession in a number of construction related topics to be able to lead that department. But at the same token, as you've grown your company now and expanding your company and expanding the scope of services that your company offers, I'm sure that it's your soft skills that are drawn upon on a much more regular basis than those technical skills that I'm sure you've got.
And the hardest thing for me is to not let my ego get ahead of me personally, because I'm used to being the best at, you know, everything that we do, I've done at one point or the other. Some I wasn't the best at, but some I was the best at. You know, take scheduling, for example. In addition to teaching it for 10 years, that's just, I have the certifications, and that's actually everybody at my company, I taught them how to schedule. Most of them because they went to Eastern, you know. So,
yeah.
And then to admit that I haven't opened the scheduling software in months, and these guys do it every day. It can be a hard pill to swallow. But in the same token, as you said, we have different responsibilities. I always tell people my responsibility is to mitigate risk and provide you the resources you need, you know. And if I do those two things, then I'll get out of your way, you know. And if you have the right people, you can do that. And it's funny how different it changes as different points of time. I can't even imagine for someone to say like Stephen Gray, how his job has changed over the years. I mean, now they're a $2 billion company. I can't imagine how his job is different from being a $2 billion company to when I got to know them and they were a couple $100 million, you know? So, you know, what is the future of your company? You know, if somebody came up to you and asked you that question, what would you say?
Well, we plan to expand into different markets. That's the next step for us. We know that we are successful in a particular type of delivery method, and we know there's a certain size project as far as project cost. You know, our average size project is about $3 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at the total breadth of public work, there's only so many $3 million and up projects that are publicly bid in Central Kentucky. So in order to expand our revenue, we need to expand outside of Central Kentucky. So we've developed and built a business plan for what that looks like and how that functions and how that works. We don't yet have the right people on the bus to go make that happen. And so we're going to wait till we get the right people on the bus to take that next step. And we don't have to take it. There's nothing that's compelling us to go move into a different market. So we're fine to do what we're doing, but we know that when we do find that key individual, whether we train them and grow them from within or whether they come from the outside, that ability to expand into an adjacent market would be pretty quick for us. So I think the future of Marrillia is a lot of what the past has been for Marrillia. It's we'll continue to see average growth year over year. We're going to continue to be in the public bid market, albeit we hope delivering under the umbrella of a couple different delivery methods, maybe more CM at risk work. But that's the 3 to 5 year future of what the company looks like.
And you said something significant. I just want to kind of reiterate, in having the right people. And I love the bus analogy because having the right people on the bus is so important. And I always, a common philosophy around my company is right person, right seat. And I mean, if you have the wrong person, but they're in the right seat, that's not going to work. If you have the right person in the wrong seat, that's not going to work. So right person, right seat, is so valuable. And rather than going and getting the job and then figuring it out, that's not a good time to do that. And I know sometimes you have to do that, but boy, that's not very enjoyable. And that's why for public work, I always tell people that when I give advice on public work, I tell them the first 3 projects, don't expect to make money on them. And I hate to say that because you plan for it, you bid for it, but you're going to miss things. You're going to have situations that you're not accustomed to. You're going to have project administration requirements that you don't normally have to do that you're going to end up doing. So if you can make money on a job in your first 3 jobs, you're probably pretty successful because you've been able to navigate that world. And I thought I would mention that having that right person, right seat is probably some of the most valuable, advice I got from anyone.
Well, and it is. And I'll be honest with you, one of my biggest failures that I've had personally is a failure to make a change, a personnel change, when you don't have the right person on the bus. We've had experiences in the past here at Marrillia where you have a team member and maybe you really like that person personally. They're a genuinely good person, but they're in over their head, or they don't fit your company culture.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of being decisive and dealing with that issue, we try to develop workarounds. Well, let's develop a workflow so that we can work around that person because they're not good at that, or so-and-so can only be on a certain size or type of project because he or she can't cope with a larger project, or he or she can't cope with the demands of working in a healthcare facility. And to be honest with you, that's a personal failure of mine and a shortcoming of mine. But it's also not fair to the employee, because that employee, if their role is being limited, and if they're beginning to feel marginalized within the company, they're going to be unhappy, and that's going to affect culture and morale, and it's going to have a negative impact on them as well. So yeah, that's happened to me on a couple of occasions,
And
in hind,
knowing
yeah,
you, Josh, I had to say, but it comes from a good place, and I have the same fault. And the good place is that you truly care about people. So you want to give people every chance in the world, but what you realize after you've done it for a while is sometimes that's the worst thing you can do, because 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 you're, number one, holding up the growth. Number two, maybe this is not the right fit for them. But where it comes from is not necessarily a bad place. So and I have to comment, it is a failure in business, but if you're gonna have a failure, if you're gonna have a flaw, that's not too bad of a flaw to have. So,
well, appreciate the positive compliment there, but you know,
um, tell me, my last bit of advice before we go to the speed rounds is, and I always like this one, and I get a lot of positive feedback from people about giving personal advice. Is there any personal? It doesn't have to be just professional advice, and we kind of talked about for the business. But if you have give any personal advice to somebody who wants to enter in, construction, wants to own their own business someday, wants to be a senior level executive with someone, what would be the personal advice you would give them? And it's not just, it doesn't have to be all professional related. It can be, David Dean did a great job. One of the things he said was having somebody good with somebody you choose the path down, meaning your spouse. And at the time I didn't think about it in that manner, and I thought he's 100% right, because if you don't have the right person beside you, and divorces, half the marriages end up in divorces, that could hurt you and hurt the company financially. It could, you know, I don't, I'm sure you've seen a lot of people go through divorces in your career, and I have too. I mean, it takes a personal toll. Um, so if you had to give advice, whether it's personal or professional, what would it be?
well, I think the ability for a leader to be really introspective and to recognize and be able to admit their own weaknesses and their own shortcomings is huge, because once you can admit your shortcomings, and once you can admit, hey, these are the areas that I'm not good at, or I don't enjoy this particular aspect of the business, build a team around you whose strengths offset your weaknesses. Um, because ultimately, as you go down this path, you want to enjoy the path as you're going down it. And if your roles and responsibilities as an executive are filled with things that you don't particularly enjoy doing, or you're not actually good at doing them, it's not going to be a very enjoyable experience. So I think what I've done personally is, when you look at the strengths of the executive leadership team that's around me, um, the roles that they fill in the company, I've been very purposeful about putting them in those roles, because they are much, much, much better at that particular aspect of the business than I am personally.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you can admit that and say, I need to be able to give so and so this set of responsibilities, your business isn't going to grow if because you're not going to be passionate about executing those different core areas of the business.
And that's some really good advice. I echo that altogether. The funny thing is that we want to surround ourselves with people like us, and sometimes, you know, that maybe is not a good thing, So, but so I'm gonna go through, the categories at the end. I call it the speed round. 10 is the highest, and 1 is the lowest in importance. If you had to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 these following categories, what would you rate? How would you rate these? And they could all be 10. They don't all have to be. Somebody called me out last time and said, well, if scheduling 10, that means estimating can be 10. No, if you think they're both 10, then say it. So with that,
Okay,
let's start scheduling.
10. Time is money, and schedule overruns here at Marilla are the number one cause of profit fade on our project. So scheduling and the ability to stick to a schedule is critical to your financial performance.
Estimating.
This is also a 10 for me. A good estimate always lays the groundwork for the success or failure of a project. If you've got a bad estimate going into a project, it's going to place an undue amount of stress on your project team. You're going to ask them to climb mountains that can't possibly be climbed, and that's just not good for anybody. But also, the reason estimating is a 10 for Marilla is that, we operate in that low bid public model, and having a good, solid, cost competitive estimate is how we get business in the door.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that as you try to grow into different delivery methods, especially that CM at risk delivery method, the ability to give an owner good, solid estimating at the schematic design and the design development and the construction document phases of the project is really, really important to delivering CM services to a client. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the estimating side of a project of a company is it's a 10 plus 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 for me.
Contract administration.
So this I would give contract administration a 9. Like I mentioned before, it's just so vital to our success on public work project. Documentation, following proper lines of communication, internal processes. It's just, if you don't have a good system in place internally, I don't honestly see how folks could be successful on public bid projects if you don't have those systems worked out.
Design.
So I'm going to probably upset any architect who's listening to the podcast. I'm going to give design a 5. I'll tell you, for us, what's more important to us on a project is it's the quality of the designer's CA department
Mm-hmm.
that really helps or takes away from the success of a project more so than the design that's on paper. There's never been a design done in the history of mankind that's been perfect. It's just does not exist. And you're going to have problems. You're going to run into issues. There's going to be constructability issues, or the square peg's not going to fit into the round hole. So for us, having an architecture firm that wants to come to the table, wants to discuss solutions, wants to help facilitate solutions in a quick, timely fashion, that's what's really important to us from the design side of things. Not necessarily the design itself.
Understood. Contracts.
So I think contracts are a 7, and most companies, and I'd say we do this, we spent years developing a really strong contract document that we feel like very well protects Marrillia, gives us a lot of rights and a lot of flexibility with how we deal with a subcontractor, particularly an underperforming subcontractor. But you know what, Scott, develop a really good contract, and if you're lucky, you get to put it on the shelf, and you never have to go utilize all those rights and remedies. So I think it's really important for a construction company to have a good, strong contract. And if you're lucky, you don't ever have to use it.
That's true. Accounting.
Accounting for me is an 8. I think it's particularly important to us when we're looking at budgets and cost reports on the self-perform work that we do. If you're a paper contractor and you basically have your overhead and your on-site general conditions, and the rest of it is subcontracted out, I think accounting might be less important. But for anybody who has a craft workforce that self-performs work, using accounting to plan, for instance, Scott, we send out job cost reports every 2 to 4 weeks to the project teams on every project. And we want them to utilize that as a tool. We want them to see where they're doing well, where they're running over budget. If you've still got a particular task left to complete and you're concerned about if you can do it within the budget, take the time to come into the office and sit down, and let's figure out a plan as to how we're going to get there, so that the outcome is what we want it to be. And unless you're looking at cost reports and accounting in real time, you're trying to make decisions with both hands tied behind your back.
It's funny, as David says, we're one of the few businesses you could be going bankrupt and not even know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or hopefully you would know it, but that happens often. So,
Yeah.
Selling work.
I think selling work is a 9, and some of the other things that you touched on, scheduling, estimating, contract administration, to me, those are the things that sell work. So if you're doing those things well, and if you're putting an emphasis on those areas of your operation, it makes selling work pretty darn easy.
And last but not least, leadership.
Well, leadership is certainly a 10. I'm not sure you've had a podcast yet where someone has not given leadership a 10. Leadership drives culture. The culture of a company is so important to a company's health. And I've seen several companies come and go over during the course of my tenure in construction. And if you ask me to describe those companies in one word, the first adjective out of my mouth would be poor leadership. So leadership is so strong, so strong in our industry. And especially as a GC, because we're the leader on a project. So for us, it's leadership on an executive level, on a project management level, on a site management level, on a foreman level. I mean, leadership is it's so important for everybody in our company to have strong leadership skills and characteristics.
Well said. And I want to give you the last word like I always do. And I do want to say before I let you take it, I've seen during the period of time, like I said, you started about the same time I did. And I know I've seen you as a small company, and I've seen you today, and I have been impressed with what you guys have been able to do. Seeing some of the projects you took part of, I've had many co-ops work for you and received a lot of positive feedback. So great credit upon you and great credit upon your company. Whatever you're doing is working, and it'll lead, it'll continue to work. Sounds like last time I had lunch with you that things are moving in that good positive direction. And I want to make one last comment. I think something that makes you really special is you're always a student of what you do. So you're constantly looking at things and evaluating things and assessing things and looking at your own performance, not just the performance of others. And it seems like a lot of times the people I talk with get to a position where they don't think they can learn anything anymore. And you convinced me that we, more than anybody in executive level positions, need to be putting our learning cap on more often. So I just, and I want to thank you for spending time with me today. I really want to thank you. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast and giving me feedback. So you have the last word, Josh.
Well, my last word is a thank you to you for taking the time to put this podcast together. And I also want to thank all the individuals that have done this podcast with you in the past. It's been really, really helpful and insightful to me, and to all those people who have chosen to share their time. Thank you, because I've learned a lot from just those 1 hour interviews. I've learned a lot from those people. And I learned a lot about their companies, and you really learn to appreciate that person and that company more. You start to look at them differently as not a faceless competitor, but more of an individual. And so that's been great for me. So I want to encourage you to keep this up.
Well, thank you once again. That's all we have today for CONEXEC. We'll join you next week with a new person, a new company, and we'll see you next week.